Hey, everybody. Thanks again for coming out, and welcome to this month's Authors Showcase Book Club. The format of this club is that we invite an author to come here to the Roots Room on Chicago's North Side and talk about a book that that author has written, be an opportunity to read a little bit from their book. And then we also invite readers who come to the club to talk about books that they maybe give a review of that book or just tell us whether they liked it or not and whether it's something we ought to read. So, our guest author tonight is Betsy Storm. She's the author of this book, Bright Lights of the Second City. And Bright Lights of the Second City is a compilation of 50 prominent Chicagoans all living with passion and purpose. And so Betsy's going to come up here in a second, get herself comfortable, read a few excerpts from her book, and tell us a little bit about it. Betsy?
Hi, my name is Betsy Storm, and my book is titled Bright Lights of the Second City 50 Prominent Chicagoans on Living with Passion and Purpose. And I got the idea to do this book because I've been in journalism and communications for all of my adult life, and I've been fortunate to meet a lot of really remarkably talented, committed people. And over the years, I've wondered, why is it that some people, given a certain deck of cards, play them one way, and other people are not able to quite get the same successful take on things, and what drives some people more than others? It's kind of everyone's inner story that I find fascinating. So about almost 5 years ago, I got the idea to do this book, and I wanted to find out who were the people, what were the passions, what were the life situations, circumstances, and sometimes even just really kind of random events that ended up shaping the some of the people who really make Chicago the world-class city that it is. And I wanted to have a few really well-known people like Bill Curtis and Ramsey Lewis, because they're so quintessentially Chicago. But I also wanted to introduce some of the unsung heroes who people don't know, like midwives who have stood by more than 1,700 mothers as they've given birth, and the primatologists at the Lincoln Park Zoo who fell in love with chimpanzees at the age of 7, just because he happened to watch a TV show one day. So I wanted to get kind of the backstory of all these people and have them kind of represent the best of Chicago too. So I made an informal matrix and wanted to do the arts, academics, activism, because that's something that's really important to me, philanthropy, sports, museums, kind of the spectrum of Chicago, a couple of elected officials just for good measure. And I put together this list, and over the years, just chipped away at getting these 50 people. In some cases, it took more than 2 years to get the interviews, which is why it took almost 5 years to write the book. But I'm happy with the group that I have, and I think they really say a lot about our city and about people and how we get to be who we are. So a few of the profiles that I find most interesting, I'm going to read for you now. One is James Lovell, and he's somebody that many people will know, particularly people of a certain age. He was an Apollo 13 astronaut, and I describe him as the embodiment of the right stuff. And he's celebrated for saving the Apollo 13 mission from seemingly certain catastrophe, as many of us remember as we sat in our living rooms. Esteemed as an American hero by a generation of Americans, Captain James, goes by Jim Lovell, courageously captained the ill-fated NASA space mission that shook the world in 1970 and was later dramatized in the film Apollo 13, based on Lovell's book, Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13. The moon-bound mission was aborted after an oxygen tank exploded, causing extreme damage to the spacecraft's fuel and oxygen supply. While the three-man crew never made it to the moon, they pulled off a miraculous journey by returning safely to Earth, thanks to the commitment, creativity, and teamwork of many people. James Lovell was born in 1928 in Parma, Ohio. He lived for a time with his mother and with relatives in Terre Haute, Indiana, after his father died in a car accident when the future astronaut was only 12 years old. Lovell's love of rocketry took off early. By age 10, he was constructing model rockets. His mother encouraged him to apply to Annapolis, the U.S. Naval Academy, to emulate the path of his uncle, a renowned naval aviator during World War I. Lovell was admitted to the academy on his second attempt. He completed his first 2 years of college on an ROTC scholarship at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Upon graduation from Annapolis, he joined the U.S. Navy as an aviator. He was accepted into NASA's space program in 1962. A recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Captain Lovell later launched a successful business career. Today, his calendar remains marked with speaking engagements and similar events. His office is located at Lovell's of Lake Forest, a highly reviewed restaurant owned by his son Jay in Chicago's far north suburbs. A history buff, Captain Lovell's cadre of accomplishments includes that of Distinguished Eagle Scout and Silver Buffalo, honors for long-term service to scouting. Here's what he says. Chicago is my adopted hometown. My grandfather settled here when he emigrated from Czechoslovakia. When my mother was born, the family lived in Oak Park, which had a large Czech community at the time. I was born in Parma, Ohio, but lived there only for the first year of my life. My participation in the Boy Scouts was a hugely formative experience that influenced my later success. Because my dad died when I was 12, scouting became my surrogate father. I was on my own a lot. Everything in scouting is mission-oriented and geared to overcoming challenges. Scouting teaches a critical skill that must be learned and acquired, leadership. Leadership leads to strong teamwork, the glue that holds every organization together. During the period when I was trying to obtain my Pathfinder badge, my leader asked me a question to which I didn't know the answer. When I simply told him that I couldn't respond, he replied, "Because you were honest, I will give you credit for it anyway." That experience always stuck with me. When you don't know something, don't try to fake it. Admit it and just move on from there. My uncle was an important role model. When visiting us, he related great stories of his adventures as a naval aviator. In those days, kids regarded naval aviation in much the same way that today's kids think of space travel, like a fantasy. When I was 10, old enough to understand what aviation was, I began reading the work of Robert Goddard, Ph.D., an American physicist and inventor who was the first person to build a liquid-fueled rocket. Rockets grabbed my interest because they represented power and a force that surpassed any other aircraft. When I applied to be part of the original group of Mercury 7 astronauts in 1958, I was rejected. As it turned out, however, when I was accepted later in 1962, the timing was even better. The Gemini and Apollo programs were going strong then. Astronauts share common characteristics, and that was especially true in the early days. They were smart people who lived on the edge, loved adventure, and wanted to explore anything new. They're individuals who know how to figure out a plan, and quickly, when something goes wrong. People often ask me why I didn't react with panic when the situation began deteriorating on Apollo 13. My response? I could have bounced off the walls for 10 minutes, but that waste of time would have accomplished nothing. Instead, we asked ourselves, what do we have on board that could help us get out of this jam? Everyone's attitude was identical. Let's put our heads together and find a solution. Once we realized the magnitude of the problems on Apollo 13, all of our efforts were channeled into getting home safely. Going to the moon quickly became secondary. But after I returned to Earth, disappointment set in. It lasted for about 10 years. But when I began writing my book, Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13, I gleaned a better understanding of the experience and all that was accomplished by Mission Control. While the flight itself was not a success, it represented a triumph of how people can manage their way out of a crisis. If the mission had gone as planned, I would have been the third man to walk on the moon, but who would remember that? Instead, I overcame near-certain catastrophe and turned it into a successful recovery. That result ultimately was more significant to my career than had I actually landed on the moon. Just for the record, Captain Lovell was interviewed at Lovell's of Lake Forest on September 21st, 2012. His birthday is March 25th, 1928. Each profile includes a set of favorites. And here are some of Captain Lovell's. His favorite book is The Killer Angels by Michael Shara. That's a current favorite of his, a classic novel of the Civil War. His favorite movie, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, directed by Peter Weir. It's an epic historical drama and seafaring adventure. His favorite place, the Adler Planetarium. He says, it brings together all the disciplines I love, astronomy, science, and spaceflight. His song, Ashokan Farewell by Jay Unger. It's an important part of the Apollo 13 soundtrack. His quotation is from President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. I want to tell you a little bit about a hero of a former Chicago police officer who was paralyzed in the line of duty. Very dramatic in Chicago when it happened. It was in the news quite a bit. His name is Jim Mullen, and here's a little bit of intro to his story. A cop, particularly an urban one, understands that there's no such thing as an ordinary day. Nobody knows that better than someone like former Chicago police officer Jim Mullen. On October 16, 1996, life as he knew it was transformed for the 31-year-old Officer Mullen when he and several other tactical officers responded to a call for help after shots were fired from an apartment building in Rogers Park on Chicago's north side. During the episode, an off-duty security guard fired a .357 Magnum at the officers. While Mullen dove for cover, a bullet penetrated his cheek, shattering his jaw and piercing his spine. As Chicagoans prayed for his life, Mullen recalls that several of his dear friends were making plans to attend his funeral. After 6 months of a grueling hospitalization, rehab, and recovery, complete with several surgeries, 4 heart attacks, and the implantation of a pacemaker, the young family man returned home to his wife, Athena, who had cared for him with such vigilance throughout his ordeal, and his baby daughter, Maggie. Mullen says, my father was a police sergeant on the north side, as were 2 of his uncles before him. I used to love to ride with my dad back in the day when you were still allowed to do that. Many of my parents' friends were cops, and we were all kind of flocked together. I grew up knowing that I would become a police officer, even though I worked in the private sector for a while. I loved everything about a cop's life, especially the humor and the satisfaction of putting bad guys in jail. I spent my entire law enforcement career in Rogers Park, a great district because it's so diverse. I think of myself as just a regular guy, even though many people call me a hero. What I experienced on the day of the shooting might have been quote-unquote heroic, but that's not the same thing. There were 6 other tactical officers at the scene, and they risked their lives every bit as much as I did. Cops endangered themselves every day. That's what the job is about. After I was shot, the odds of survival were against me. My wife, Athena, stayed with me all day, and my parents took the night shift. I was never alone. Athena taped a picture of our baby daughter to the ceiling above my head to inspire me. The late Cardinal Bernardine, although he was gravely ill, visited me in the hospital. I believe that because of him, in part, thousands of Chicagoans actively prayed for me. Many still do today. You often hear people say that everything happens for a reason, but I'm not so sure that's true. The aftermath of the accident has been more difficult for my wife and my family than for me. Quite frankly, I'm a realist. I was shot in the right cheek with a .357 Magnum. The very idea that I am still alive is incredible. I'm not bitter towards the man who shot me. The shooter died in prison in 2011. Some days, yes, I'm angry. However, you need to forgive so that you can keep moving forward. Athena and I try to keep things simple, but the responsibilities I have as a husband, son, and father are still there. It's been a tough road. When you become paralyzed, learning how to care for yourself becomes your full-time job. However, I'm fortunate to have access to the best medical care and resources. I want people to understand there is life after paralysis, and it can be a wonderful life. Your life isn't over, but it is more difficult. I'm happy about many things. One pleasure that I most enjoy is sitting in the passenger seat of my blue 1970 Oldsmobile convertible and taking a ride up Sheridan Road with the top down. I really am the same old guy I used to be. I just don't move as quickly. Mullen's birthday is May 3rd, 1964, and I interviewed him at his home on the Northwest Side. Jim Mullen's favorite movies include Caddyshack, The Blues Brothers, and The Quiet Man, directed by John Ford. These were the ones I loved to watch when I was growing up, he says. His favorite place, Diversey Harbor. I always feel hopeful there, probably because I spent many summer nights there as a kid. Quotation is from George Orwell, British writer of dystopian classics. People sleep peaceably in their beds at night only because rough men stand ready to do violence on their behalf. Kathy Kelly. I'd like to tell you about Kathy Kelly. She's such an impressive woman. She's a peace activist, not just any peace activist. She's been nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. And Kathy Kelly founded an organization called Voices in the Wilderness, which was formed to, quote unquote, nonviolently challenge the economic warfare being waged against the people of Iraq. Voices in the Wilderness organized 70 delegations to travel to Iraq between 1996 and 2003. Kathy herself visited Iraq 27 times to bring medicine to Iraqi families, meet with United Nations representatives, and act as a voice for people who had no voice. She now coordinates a group called Voices for Creative Nonviolence. Kathy received a bachelor's from Loyola University and a master's in religious education from the Chicago Theological Seminary. She is, as I said, a 3-time nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize, and she has been described as probably the most respected leader in the American peace movement. Here's what she tells us about herself. I always assumed I'd be a nun. Growing up in the Garfield Ridge neighborhood on the southwest side, nuns were the only professional people we knew. Doctors and lawyers didn't live in our neighborhood. I was enthralled by the nuns, but changed my mind about my future when I was a junior at Loyola University. By that time, nuns were moving into apartments, adopting streetwear, and in some ways living like everyone else. I shared an apartment with 2 sisters for several years and joined in their work in our impoverished neighborhood in Chicago's uptown area, but I didn't enter religious life. I'm still drawn to the lives religious women lead. One quality that attracted me as a child and still impresses me is that nuns are not interested in accumulating personal wealth. My father was a Catholic high school teacher. My mother had been an indentured servant in Ireland. One of 6 kids, acquiring wealth never even occurred to me. One of my first important mentors, Carl Meyer, also was my husband for 13 years. Carl was a protege of Dorothy Day. In the 1930s, Day helped establish the Catholic Worker Movement, which is a nonviolent pacifist organization that continues to combine direct aid for the poor and homeless with nonviolent direct action on their behalf. I became a war tax resister, reducing my salary to beneath the taxable income level. I've been frightened many times in my life. One of the scariest times initially was when I went to federal prison in Lexington, Kentucky for 9 months in 1989. I'd planted corn on top of nuclear missile sites on 5 separate occasions. One thing I know, that there's a war against the poor in this country, is particularly obvious in prison. Through the prison experience, I was emboldened, and it bolstered my belief that I could survive something very difficult. I am insanely optimistic about the future. I would not rule out the possibility that in 100 years, people will look back at our time and wonder, what were they thinking? By that time, history, as well as social, cultural movements, may be at a stage resembling the abolitionary movement that helped end slavery. There may be a tipping point when people declare, we don't want to live like that anymore. Interestingly, there's now even talk about World War II and whether there might have been other solutions to the problems of the time. The book that best describes a committed life of activism is titled From Yale to Jail, The Life Story of a Moral Dissenter by David Dellinger. Its message is that acting in response to the major ethical questions of our time requires risk. Recompense comes in the form of relationships and the opportunity to live in accordance with your beliefs. Kathy Kelly was born on December 10, 1952. Kathy Kelly's favorite book is The Remains of the Day. Her favorite music and sounds are the songs of Leonard Cohen, Gregorian chants, and the Muslim call to prayer. Her favorite place, the streets in al-Basra in southern Iraq. She says, I hope to walk there again someday. In Chicago, my favorite park is the one behind the Museum of Science and Industry. Her favorite quotation, is from Barbara Deming, an American feminist and an advocate of nonviolent social change. And it says, "We are all part of one another." I'm going to conclude by telling you about somebody who I really liked. Her name is Mary Summers. And I nicknamed her the mother of all midwives because at the time of this writing, which was several years ago, she had already accompanied 1,500 women on their journeys to giving birth. And she has some really interesting insights about that process and what it involves. She's witnessed, at that point, over 1,500 births, and she is a certified professional midwife, sort of considered the mother of all midwives in Chicago. People talk about her when you're trying to find a midwife to interview. People say, you need to talk to Mary Summers. She's a leader and a mentor to many. As a World Health Organization fellow in the 90s, she focused her studies on maternal health and breastfeeding programs in Holland and England. She earned a bachelor's in women's studies from Northeastern Illinois University, and she also holds a master's in public health. And in her book, More Than a Midwife, published in 2011, Mary Summers shares stories of the glory, grace, and joy, as well as the heartbreak and tragedy that she's experienced through her 20-plus years of working with mothers and their infants. She begins, "As one of 13 children growing up in Detroit, I knew a radical nun who was a missionary in Ghana, as well as a midwife. That turned out to be a good thing. When I decided I wanted to become a midwife, my parents didn't think it was a completely crackpot thing to do. Sister Ann demonstrated a commitment of service that was very appealing. Social justice is an important aspect of my life, and midwifery seemed like one way to follow that path. I think of midwifery as one part science, one part feminism, and one part spiritual calling. I was raised in a traditional Catholic family. Like many big Catholic families of the 60s and 70s, mine was socially progressive. Today, my beliefs lie in the realm of Christian mysticism. The mystics, people like 12th century German abbess Hildegard of Bingen, 12th century St. Clare of Assisi, and 14th century English philosopher Julian of Norwich, a woman, have spoken to me in a way that has resonated since I was a young girl. We don't feel God by reading about God, but rather by being aware of God's presence as a felt experience. The mystics convey a sense of play, awe, and wonder. When a seed is planted and a flower grows, we explain that occurrence scientifically, but isn't that process and its power also a sign of God's presence and mystery? And look at childbirth. The mother-baby dyad often instinctively knows what to do when left to its own devices. We've lost some of our instinctual knowledge as we've become more intellectual about natural processes. The classes I teach let women reclaim their inner knowledge that comes from instinct and from the deep places in us that are primal and spiritual. Every time I witness a birth, I'm aware of my soul. Birth is a mystical experience. Obviously, labor is a long and hard process for most first-time mothers, and unfortunately, many women have let society convince them that they can't do the hard thing that is birth. Even professional women who graduated from law school, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, or completed marathons sometimes confide that they don't think they'll be able to endure a natural childbirth process. However, we only do the difficult things in life because they're anchored to our deeper values and our deeper sense of ourselves. And when we do these hard things, that experience becomes an important element of who we are. That's why birth is transformative. I don't advocate one kind of birth for everyone, and I'm not against epidurals or other interventions across the board, but I do feel strongly that women should be conscious about their choices. Mary Summers was interviewed in Chicago at a healthcare office, and her birthday is September 10th, 1960. Her favorite book is by Dave Eggers, the novelist. It's called What is the What? In this exceptional novel, the history of Sudan's civil war is recounted through the eyes of Valentino Achak Deng, a refugee who immigrates to the U.S. Her favorite movie is Black Robe, a 1991 movie set in the 17th century. And the movie's story revolves around a Jesuit priest and a young companion who were guided through the Quebec wilderness by Algonquin Indians to find a distant mission in the dead of winter. Her music, The Green Fields of France, an Irish ballad, and Be Not Too Hard, written by Joan Baez and performed by Donovan. I want these songs to be played at my funeral because they illustrate the importance of compassion and shared humanity. We're not always our best selves, but sometimes we are. Her favorite place, the woods. I love to walk there when it's misty, damp, and swampy beneath my feet. That feels like home to me. Quotation, to know and not to act is not to know. That's attributed to Lao Tse, the first philosopher of the Taoist school. Bright Lights of the Second City, as a writer, was a dream project. To interview 50 people of my own choosing is not something you often get to do, especially people so inspirational. And it really has moved me to pursue certain goals in my own life and to just treasure a lot of things that are already in my life. So in that way, it was definitely the best project that I've ever done, and I'm happy to have finished it as well, and hope to share it with a lot of other people. My book can be purchased at any bookstore in Chicago, or they can order it. It can be purchased online in Amazon, or through my website, betsystorm.com.
Hey, thanks to Betsy for coming out and sharing that information with us today. I just want to thank everybody who showed up today for coming, and I want to tell people viewing this online or on TV to keep in mind that we're here at the Roots Room on Chicago's North Side. If you want to come and join us, if you're an author or if you're a reader and want to come and talk about one of your books, you can go to meetup.com/authors-showcase. I'll put that information right here on the screen, and you can sign up for the club, and you can come and join us on the nights that we're meeting here and come and talk about your book. So please take a look for us at meetup.com. All right, thanks again.